game. Need we say more? Maybe not, but we will. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, previewing rivalry weekend like nobody else, including Ohio State at Michigan. And this is the best way to start out this conversation is to bring in Steve Deace from Michigan Podcast. Steve, how you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing well, Mark. And considering the way things were trending for Michigan earlier this year, the fact that this has any sense of meaning or at least pregame aura of competitiveness is not something that, frankly, a lot of Michigan fans thought was going to be the case when they saw the team that rolled in and then rolled out of Madison, Wisconsin at the end of September. So excited. Far more. I'm as excited for the game on Saturday as I thought I was going to be heading into this season. Far more excited for the game on Saturday than I thought I was going to be about halfway through the season.
And what you've seen out of this Michigan football team since the second half of the Penn State game has obviously been a great comeback there. And despite all the resiliency they showed in the game, to be let down that much by the drop in the end zone, then to come all the way back and to be able to show resiliency again, to throttle Notre Dame, to beat a good Indiana team last week, down a touchdown to score 32 consecutive points. Are there specific facets of this team when you match it up against Ohio State that give you hope in regards to the X's and O's? Or is it more just a feel that, hey, we're on a roll and we've got nothing to lose and I've seen this before?
Well, this is different than last year. Last year, Michigan was peaking at the right time too. They'd just come off a revenge tour. Ohio State had how many shaky games, including the week before against Maryland, a game they probably should have lost, Mark. And 2-point conversion, Michigan wins the division right there. And who knows what happens the next week in Columbus at that point. But the reason this feels different is because suddenly out of nowhere, and the only impetus I can come up with is whatever was said at halftime in Happy Valley. And Jim Harbaugh jogs back onto the field, and the ABC reporter, because he hates doing these interviews, so he never does them. They never stands there and does it. It's funny. Nick Saban just stands there and talks for 20 minutes before games live. Doesn't seem to get in the way of him winning, but our guys, whether it's Lloyd Carr or Jim, our guys just seem like Michigan don't want to talk to these people, but okay, whatever. And so if you want an interview with Harbaugh, you're not getting a stand-up. He's not going on camera. So that's why you often see these sideline reporters jogging with him on and off the field to get a dry quote they can impart when they get back on the air. And his only quote to the ABC sideline reporter was, "This will be Michigan football's finest hour." I don't know, if he went Winston Churchill on him at halftime. I don't know what happened. But out of nowhere, I mean, literally, there wasn't like a progression. And you're like, boy, they're almost. I know you watch this stuff every bit as closely as I do, Mark. This was not like steadily building, man. It was just like someone just said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And out of nowhere, Michigan suddenly became the team that had all this hype going into the season that everybody thought they were going to be, with the players they had returning, the offense they were switching to. And it literally just happened out of nowhere. And that's why I was so hesitant after that, because I wondered if there was maybe some internal chemistry issues. And then when your back's against the wall and if you lose a second game, all your season goals are out. And so you kind of put your chemistry issues away there because, necessity is the mother of invention, right? And maybe that's your Alamo last stand, but it doesn't mean you're going to do this continuously. Well, they have. And it's the most amazing thing I've ever seen in season in Michigan football that's been good. For this long period of time. I've seen Michigan not have a mediocre season, go up to Happy Valley and not really compete, and then come back the next week and Tim Biaka runs for 300 yards and they beat Ohio State out of nowhere. I've seen that. But I mean where there was just, that's it. Okay, fine, we're going to do this now. And they sustain it for as long as they have. I've never seen this in my time as a Michigan fan, and I've been around here for a while. So it's stunning. And then the last stage of this evolution with Shea Patterson, We had all kind of given up. Help, Mark. I just told you 3 weeks ago, Speed in Space was dead. He's had the best back-to-back games any Michigan quarterback has ever had, ever. He's thrown for 700 some odd yards and 9 touchdowns, and those are against two deep top 25 or 30 in pass efficiency defense. After what he did to them in the last 2 weeks, he's gone from 63rd to 32nd in QBR. I like the QBR over the NCAA rating because the QBR takes into account your rushing ability, and that's more of a factor, I think, for college quarterbacks than NFL.
And the situation.
What's that?
And the situation.
And the situation, yeah. So he's gone up almost 30 spots, 29 spots in QBR in 2 weeks. That's with everybody having 10 games of data. That's not easy to do, man. You can do that like in September when everybody's only got 2 or 3 games of data, but he's done it with 10 games of data just to show. And this has come out of nowhere. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not inside the team. I don't know what happened, but this is the most. I've seen sudden downturns. I've seen Michigan struggle for several games, then kind of come out of nowhere and play great, or play great for several games, then come out of nowhere and lay an egg. But I've never seen Michigan in the middle of, not even in the middle of the season, 2/3 into a year, just flip a switch, and then the whole trajectory of the season changes. And it's one hell of a coaching job. Whatever they did there, there's no way else to spin it. It's one hell of a coaching job to salvage a season that it looked like it might put the Jim Harbaugh era in existential peril 2 months ago. And now suddenly you're looking at it, and you're looking at the way they're recruiting the players on this team. They're going to be back next year. And now you start thinking that, I don't know, maybe they figured out how to crack the code. And then we'll get our final answer to that on Saturday, obviously, whether that's true or not.
One hell of a coaching job indeed. This is a guy sitting right here who has been a staunch defender of Jim Harbaugh, and I have absolutely no incentive to be. This is a man who guaranteed Joe Namath-like a win over my beloved 1986 Buckeyes and deprived them of the Rose Bowl. I have no incentive to defend Jim Harbaugh. I do believe that he is being paid to win championships, so at some point he needs to deliver. But as we've talked about, by any tangible measurement, the program is leaps and bounds beyond what it was when he inherited it. And he has certainly had a few breaks go against him that were not under his control. And like you, I've seen a different Michigan football team over the past several weeks. And because of that, I'm not necessarily going to make a results or game prediction right this second. But the prediction I will make is that if Ohio State wins this game, it will be because they're just a more talented, better team that's firing on all engines, and because it's just a great football game that either team could have won. But I expect Michigan to show up and play extremely well and play like one of the 10 best teams in America.
Wholeheartedly agree with that. And I think, it's a fascinating motivational dynamic for Ohio State. In any other scenario, this would be your classic sandwich game, except obviously with the magnitude of this rivalry. And if you're Ryan Day, because you don't want the narrative out there. Okay, it was really just Urban Meyer is an all-time great coach, and he owned Jim Harbaugh, and not that Ohio State did. You don't want that. On the other hand, you're coming off a game, and Ohio State with the getting Penn State and Michigan back to back to end the season, the only two teams that come close to recruiting in our league on their level. And you've got to run J.K. Dobbins over 35 times in order to grind out that win. I think when you looked at the way that Ryan Day was puckering on the play calling in the second half, I think there was a clear nod that Justin Fields' thumb, they weren't entirely confident in that. And that was a physical slobber knocker, man. I mean, Penn State just decided when it was 21-0, just decided, you know what, we're just turning this into a hockey game. We might lose, but we're not getting punked out of here. And they turned it into a fist fight. And it kind of helped that Sean Clifford got hurt, not because he's not had a great year, he has, but the other quarterback only knows one speed, and it's just beast mode, zone read. That's all we know how to do. And they turn this into kind of an old school slobber knocker at the line of scrimmage, and to have to then play a game like that with all that emotion and everything in your stadium, and then come right around, and now you're going to go on the road for your in-state rival or your intrastate rival who's built they changed their whole program to win this game. That's why they did this. mean, Jim Harbaugh, out of nowhere, did what everybody said he would never do. Gave up control of his offense. He's an offensive guy. I mean, he had been considered one of the great offensive minds in all of football, pro or college, until the last couple of years. And he gave up control to a guy who had never, ever coordinated an offense and said, hey, you come here and we'll put you in charge and work around you. And he let him keep control even when things were as bad as they looked the first month and a half of the season. And this was all done because Jimmy made the calculation, I have to do this or I can't beat those guys in Columbus. I can't. Because this isn't I'm Stanford against the rest of the Pac-12, and if I'm the one physical team, I can beat Chip Kelly. This is, these guys are recruiting better than me, and they're playing this style. I can't overcome that, you know? And they have certain recruiting advantages in state I can't ever bridge. If you're Jim Harbaugh, you can't. And Ohio State's probably almost always been more talented than Michigan most years anyway, even in years when this thing was competitive annually. And I think he understood then that way, if he couldn't make it up in terms of personnel, then he was going to have to make it up in terms of schematics. And this was all done to go for broke, to finally to not just sit here and go 8-4, 9-3 all the time, and figure out, can we actually beat those guys in Columbus? Changed his entire program in order to make that happen for this game. Don Brown, we played more zone defense this year. I'll guarantee we played more zone defense this year than we have, in Don Brown's whole career going back to, when he was at UMass or wherever. We played a ton of zone this year. I mean, so we have a lot of this has been done for the last 365 days to get to this moment and this game. And while I think that's a motivational edge that Michigan has. Now, how many points that's worth, I don't know. And you saw in 2017, it was worth getting up 14-0, and Josh Metellus dropping an interception in the end zone that might have sealed that game. But in the end, the better team ended up winning. So that gets you maybe a touchdown or so with a home field advantage in the environment that Ohio State will see on Saturday. But in the end, Michigan's got to show that it can put all these athletes it recruits in positions to make big plays, as you've seen Ohio State do year after year after year. And now they're finally beginning to do that. And I think what's going to be fascinating is you have arguably the two best secondaries in college football. I think all four of Ohio State's guys are all going into the NFL for this coming season. All four of the guys Michigan is starting will all be in the NFL in the next couple of seasons. But both of them are going up against the two best receiving corps they've by far faced all season long. If you look at what Michigan did against Notre Dame's edge rushers, what it did against Yetur Gross-Matos and Penn State's edge rushers, and they gave up one combined sack in all of those games, but they have never seen a force of nature like Chase Young at the exact same time. So, it's fascinating. Ari Wasserman at The Athletic put out a poll about 3 or 4 weeks ago asking Ohio State fans. He covers Ohio State for The Athletic. And he put out a poll 3 or 4 weeks ago asking his followers, would you rather beat Michigan and not go to the playoff, or go to the playoff and lose to Michigan? And like 80% of Ohio State fans said they'd rather beat Michigan and not go to the playoff. He just did that poll again yesterday. And the results are now like 65% of Ohio State fans are like, well, we'd rather go to the playoff and lose to Michigan than beat Michigan and not go to the playoff. And I think if you're Ryan Day, you have to ask yourself, if you beat Michigan, Ohio State fans want to win that game badly, obviously. The whole season, the whole program's about beating Michigan. But if you beat Michigan and at the end of the game, Justin Fields gets hit upside the head and is in concussion protocol, and you go to Indianapolis and lose to Minnesota in the Big Ten championship and don't get in the playoff because of that, are you really going to sit around for the next 365 days? You're in Ohio State. You tell me. I don't know. I'm asking. You're really going to say, well, hey, it was worth beating Michigan. Really? So you got your your team of the century was really about going to the Cotton Bowl? Really? I don't know. I wouldn't feel that way. It was me. We haven't, unfortunately, been in this situation with this dilemma in recent years. So I don't know how I would react. I don't think that's the way I would think. But if you're Ohio State, you just had to put 35. You had to put a lot of tread on J.K. Dobbins' tires. You played by far your most physical game of the year. You just saw Justin Fields with a thumb injury and then an ankle injury. And you have 4 more games to play to get to what your ultimate goal is. I wonder how that plays into this game. On the other hand, this is it for Michigan. It's loser leave town match for them, because they're in the same dilemma. They have, this is the largest margins in the same season Michigan has ever beaten Michigan State, Notre Dame by, ever. But if they go out there and don't finish this on Saturday, it's going to kind of feel like, nah. And so I think it's a fascinating motivational crossroads both teams are at going into this one.
The situation that you have just outlined, Steve, I believe for most college football fans, but especially that are connected to a rivalry like this, and maybe this is the only one, possibly, I can only speak to this one as a fan, draws the difference between analyzing that situation and basically analyzing your own heartstrings in the poll era versus the playoff / BCS era, meaning what was defined as and felt like a good season or great season then, and what was the primary objective versus what is it now. And I would not have wavered in any way, shape, or form 20 years ago in answering beat Michigan, period. Mm-hmm. That's all that matters. Beat Michigan. I can live with being ranked 13th instead of 7th, or going to whatever bowl game versus going to the upper tier bowl game, or missing out on a number 1 vote at the end of the season versus beating Michigan. But now that's a more difficult conclusion to draw for me personally. And I think the results of the poll that you underline how important this game still is to Ohio State fans, that you would risk and make that choice 65 to 80% of the time to beat your rival versus going to a playoff to win a championship, that it's still that important.
Well, and look at the roster.
If I could say one other thing, in a series in which they're not trading wins and losses, you could, as an Ohio State fan, you've got a cushion of 15 wins, and you could say, you know what, we'll lose to them this year. We hate that more than anything, but lose and then go to the playoff and possibly win a national. Of course, we'll do that. But even in a rivalry in which it's not been won on the field for 15 consecutive years, it's still that important to beat Michigan for a 16th time or whatever it is. Sure.
And I think you also have to look at a lot of the guys that Ohio State's going to put on the field Saturday aren't going to be back here next year. Okay. That basically that defensive line is gone. And, well, Zach Harrison is starting now, so he'll be back. But Chase Young and almost all those guys will be gone, although Cooper now is going to redshirt and be back next year. That entire secondary will be gone. J.K. Dobbins will be gone. I mean, Justin Fields is going to be surrounded by a lot of new guys next season. I think I counted 4 starters on the offensive line will not return next year. So this is the season to win the championship. You got the schedule set up. I mean, we're sitting here, it's week 14. This is the first real road game Ohio State has played this year. Now, it's not their fault. It's not Ohio State's fault that Nebraska, Scott Frost did not deliver the product that was expected. But this is the first real environment, plus the team that we're going up against can actually hit back. Road game, Ohio State's played the whole season. And it's the last game of the year. So you have the harmonic kind of schedule advantage with the talent that's been assembled here. You can't take a season like that for granted. And I don't know. I will be fascinated to see nuances like how many carries does Master Teague get on Saturday? Because if you go in and win this game by 1 point, and Minnesota beats Wisconsin, and I think they will, you go in and win this game by 1 point, Minnesota, and you lose to Minnesota the next week, you're not going to be in the playoff because those top 3 teams are going to be in. And Minnesota's going to get in over you because they just beat you for the Big Ten championship. And I just don't. I can't imagine that. Hey, a 16th win in a row over Michigan. I'm just going to fire that up on YouTube in April, and that'll make me feel better about the fact that we didn't even make the playoff. I don't know. Again, I'm not the Ohio State fan. I don't know. I don't know that zeitgeist. It's not my DNA. Not the water table I drink out of. I just know for me, I'd have been like, I know what beating Michigan feels like. We've been there, done that. Probably do it again next year when we get them at home. I mean, national championships. Hell, we had an NFL farm team here in 2016 and didn't win or 2015 and didn't win a championship. They don't come along easily. Not easy to win one of those suckers. And this is the year where Tua gets hurt. I mean, it's just It's like it's set for you. I don't know. I'll be fascinated to see, because you have to also keep in mind your coach is not a college guy. He has spent some college time here, but he's an NFL guy. And NFL coaches think about stuff like that. And I will be fascinated to see, if Ohio State does everything it can to win the game, but within certain parameters, meaning we cannot put 70 carries on J.K. Dobbins in back-to-back weeks before we even get to the Big Ten championship game. We can't do that. We can't expose, if Fields is not quite as explosive, we cannot expose him too often against Michigan's pass rushers. Maybe we can't run as much zone read with him. Maybe we can't attack the middle of the field where Don Brown's defense is more vulnerable this year because they're playing less man and more zone. But those are throws that require more velocity to complete down the field than those fades against man coverage up the sideline. I don't know. Those will be little touches, I think, that are going to be worth watching on Saturday.
So Ohio State, Michigan, or simply the game, and we get perspective from Steve Deace from Michigan Podcast. Steve, we certainly enjoyed the time. It was a great trip down memory lane and perspective on this year's game, and certainly we encourage everyone to go over to Michigan Podcast for this particular podcast, but throughout the year in tracking Steve's thoughts on Michigan football, basketball, and the Big Ten and the national scene as well. And I assume, Steve, you will have your prediction there on the podcast this week.
At some point, yes.
All right, Steve. Thank you so much. It was a great time,
care, man.
and we appreciate it. Enjoy the game.
You bet.